Hi, I'm Marjorie Lewis. When I was a college student at Arizona State University back in the day, I had a professor who often had us work on projects, and when it came time to presenting, he would start each class by asking, "Who wants to go first?" Inevitably, no one did. Too risky. I figured my classmates and I were experiencing the same thought process. If I didn't do it right, I'll be embarrassed. I'll let someone else go first and I'll just jump in later. Over the course of my life, I've come to realize that going first can be a burden. I've also come to realize that going first can come with many rewards. Going first opens doors. Going first transforms lives. My sister, for example, was in 7th grade when she told Mom she wanted to become a lawyer. Now, this was in the 1960s, and my mom knew that there were few women attorneys at the time. What did my mother do? One afternoon, she looked through the yellow pages. Remember those? And she found the address of the only female attorney in town. When she picked up my sister from school that day, Mom drove straight to the woman's office. She parked out front, pointed to the shingle, and she told my sister, "Look, you can do it too." My sister went on to become not only a lawyer, but a federal judge. Yes, transforms lives. She may never have known it, but that attorney, the only female attorney in town that day, played a part in creating a path for my sister. And so did a woman by the name of Arabella Mansfield. Arabella Mansfield, in 1869 in the state of Iowa, became the first woman admitted to the Bar Association in the United States. At the time, state law kept the Bar Association open to men only. So Arabella had to take it to court. And as a result of Arabella's court challenge, Iowa became the first state to accept women and minorities into its Bar Association. In 1980, more than 100 years later, Arabella Mansfield was inducted into the Iowa Women's Hall of Fame. Add to that the most prestigious award given by the National Association of Women Lawyers is named after Arabella Mansfield. Arabella Mansfield took a chance. She was willing to go first. My guess is when my mom heard that I wanted to become a sports writer, she looked for female bylines in our local sports pages but found none. What did she tell me? You don't have to have a role model to become a role model. In that moment, I knew that someday I'd go first. I embraced the role of going first. I also knew that with it came a heavy responsibility that transcended my job. I knew I'd be looked at differently. I knew I'd be watched. So I was prepared when in 1984 the Fort Worth Star-Telegram hired me. The first time, 1984, the first time the newspaper had hired a woman to be exclusively a sports writer. 2 years later, I was assigned to cover the Dallas Cowboys, the first woman from any news entity assigned to the Cowboys beat. I'll admit, being the first woman to cover the Dallas Cowboys beat was challenging. I'll never forget my first training camp at California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks. I had just watched the first practice of camp that summer. When practice ended, I was walking away from the field when a free agent football player walked up to me. He stopped, looked me squarely in the eyes, and he said, "You don't belong here." I had to think fast. So what was my response? Well, I just watched you practice, and I'm going to be here a lot longer than you are. He was soon cut, and I never saw him again. But what about my colleagues? What was it like for them to work with a woman in the press box for the first time? Well, it was my first game, a home exhibition game, and as tradition, or the expectation, it was the newspaper's 2 beat writers who were assigned to sit in the front row of the press box. Columnists and other writers were assigned to sit in the second and third rows. So I entered the press box, sat in the front row, set up my computer, and then I walked away to get a soft drink. When I returned, I noticed a heated discussion was taking place among my colleagues standing behind the third row. And within minutes, my phone rang. It was my sports editor, the man who had assigned me to the Cowboys beat. He said to me, "The men are upset because someone is sitting in the front row." And then he asked me, "Who's sitting in the front?" My response, "Who do you think?" He started throwing out names, trying to guess, and each time I'd say no, no, no. It took him about 4 tries until he figured out who was sitting in the front row. "You?" he asked me. I said, "Yes." His response, "Get back there." He shouted that to me, "Get back there." But I refused. So he said, "Well, then you deal with the guys." Well, none of the men said a word to me, and I sat in the front row from then on. I can't say what became my legacy, but in my 3rd season covering the Cowboys, the Star-Telegram named Ellen Alfano its first female sports editor. I'd like to think that my work spoke for itself and perhaps played a small part in her selection. In 2018, my first novel was published by HarperCollins Publishing, When the Men Were Gone, based on a true story of a woman who coached football in Brownwood, Texas during World War II. Tylene Wilson. She was a first. And I was drawn to her story because it resonated with my own. It led me to question, what did Tylene experience as a first? A woman coaching football during one of the most trying times in our nation's history. What kind of pushback did she get? What kind of resistance? What did she experience? But most of all, why did she persevere? What was it like for her being first? I came to admire Tylene Wilson not only for the person she was, but for her resilience as a pioneer, as a trailblazer, and for her relentless and fearless spirit. To be first, after all, allows no wiggle room. Even the slightest error or minor failure, and who's perfect, is often magnified. As Tylene's husband, John, asks Tylene the night before she coached her first football game, the night when he began to experience cold feet. They're going to watch your every move, Tylene. They're going to look for reasons to mock you. Can you be perfect? This is our experience. This is our expectation. This is our journey. But there is good news. History tells us we're up to the task. Now, we're living in an era where women are breaking barriers and doing extraordinary things at a rate never seen before. This year, Kamala Harris became the first woman elected vice president of the United States, just 4 years after Hillary Clinton became the first female presidential candidate nominated by a major party in the U.S. Catherine Bigelow became the first woman to win an Oscar for Best Director in 2010 for The Hurt Locker at the 82nd Annual Academy Awards. Jen Welter became the first woman to coach in the NFL when the Arizona Cardinals hired her specifically for training camp in 2015. Just last season, Sarah Fuller gained national headlines by making history when she became the first woman on an NCAA Power 5 football team to score 2 extra points in a football game for Vanderbilt. Fuller's experience came on the heels of other firsts for women in college football, like Liz Heaston at Willamette, Ashley Martin at Jacksonville State, Katie Hanida at New Mexico, and April Goss at Kent State. And how many of us have read or seen Hidden Figures? If you have, you know Katherine Johnson, a pioneer in space, science, and computing. As a result of her preparation and courage, she went on to do incredible work as a NASA scientist. A recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Katherine Johnson will forever stand as a role model for women and minorities in science. While women are doing extraordinary things in larger numbers today, women stepping out of traditional male roles is not new to this era. We must never forget Amelia Earhart, the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Or Rosa Parks, who launched a civil rights movement. Or Elizabeth Blackwell, who in 1849 became the first woman to graduate from medical school in the United States. These are just a few of the many women who have embraced going first. And they've gone on to do extraordinary things. I'd like to finish with a personal story. Back in the mid-'80s, I was asked by my employer at the time, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, to attend a reception for a national hero. Soon after I arrived, I was introduced to her. Marjorie, I'd like you to meet Sally Ride. I was a 20-something from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I was about to shake hands with greatness, an astronaut, a physicist, an engineer, a trailblazer. Dr. Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. Naturally, I was trembling. But then Dr. Ride and I struck up a conversation. We talked about women and careers that had once been exclusive to men, and we talked about the perceptions of women in those roles. She then congratulated me on my recent hiring as a Star-Telegram sports writer. But what surprised me, and what stayed with me throughout the years since that event in downtown Fort Worth, Texas, was how much Dr. Sally Ride was a regular person. Someone who could have grown up with me in the same neighborhood, and still someone who had gone on to do extraordinary things. In the years since, I have come to understand that greatness is not a reserved space. Every woman has the power to do extraordinary things. Every woman has the power to inspire. So today, when I think about that college professor who asked, "Who wants to go first?" and when I reflect on the lessons I've learned since that question was first posed, my thoughts turn to hope. Indeed, it is my hope that the next time any of us is asked, "Who wants to go first?" a sea of hands will shoot skyward. Thank you.